Hello everyone, this is Mar Haddad here again. Before we start doing the lab for the authentication on OSPF, we need first to know what are the types of authentication available on our MikroTik routers. Here we have the lab scenario that we are going to work on in the upcoming lecture. R1 connected to R2, R2 connected to R3, R3 connected to R1, and we have the IP addresses over here, and here we have also the loopback or the bridge interfaces. So we are going to do authentication between routers, like between R1 and R2, and R1 and R3, and so forth, okay? Before we start going and doing the lab, we need to know first what are the authentication types that we have on MikroTik routers. We do have three types on MikroTik routers for OSPF authentication. Type number one is none. Second is simple. And the third is MD5, okay? None, simple, and MD5. The authentication on the MikroTik router should be done inside the interface. That means when we go in the OSPF configuration on the MikroTik router, and after we advertise the networks, normally the interfaces will be dynamically shown. So what we need to do, we have to manually list OSPF inside the interface, and from there we can change the authentication. It's similar to when we were changing the priority to elect the DR and the BDR. That's we have done it inside the interface. Okay, we're going to see that in the upcoming lab, so don't be worried about it. Now, authentication none, it's none. That means that we don't have authentication. That in case we enable OSPF here, and we enable OSPF here, and we enable OSPF here, and we advertise the networks, and all they form neighborship. In this case, by default, MikroTik doesn't have authentication enabled for OSPF, so it's always none. That's by default. That's why we can form directly neighborship. Okay, remember, if we go to the lesson of the hello packets, we have said that when they share hello packets, two routers to each other, inside the hello packets there is authentication, and that should be met. That means if the authentication is not met between one router and the other, which are connected to each other and they have both OSPF enabled, in this case they will not form neighborship. Okay, so authentication is one condition to be met in order two routers to have neighborship together. Okay, none is not really the best to keep it on our MikroTik router, because I can give you an example. Imagine you have here a network, that's a switch here, a multi-access network, and then we have here the routers connected to this switch. They are all on the same subnet. Then in case someone could get access to this switch, he can put his router over here and he enable OSPF, and all other routers have OSPF. If there is no authentication and he knows already what is the network he advertises, then he can form neighborship, and then he get all LSAs, and then he can get inside our network, and that's something we really need to avoid. If we keep none, then he could do that. But if we do make authentication, which are simple and MD5, we're gonna see it in a moment, then this will be one more layer of defense for us to secure our network or our OSPF network. Okay, or possibly if he doesn't put a router, maybe some people can also emulate OSPF on their PC. They can have, let's say, this is a PC here, this is a PC, he can put a software here on his PC installed, and he can enable OSPF on that software. The software can emulate OSPF, and in this case the other routers will think that that's a router connected, and then they also will start communicating with this emulated software on the PC. And then this person can also get inside our network and see what's happening in our traffic in the network for OSPF, and that's something we really need to avoid. Okay, so what I advise to do, we need to really configure authentication on our routers for OSPF. We have two types of authentications here. We have the simple and we have the MD5. Let's talk about simple. Simple, that means it's a password. And both of them you have to put a password, actually. It's a key phrase. But the difference between simple and MD5, that simple doesn't do encryption. That means if we enable simple authentication on this router and simple authentication on this router, the password are sent between the one to the other clear text. Clear text means it's sent as it is. For example, if you put the password 123456, then this password will be sent from router 1 to router 3, and from router C to router 1. They should be similar, of course, to be matched, but they will be sent as a clear text. That means that anyone who can intercept this link over here using any capture software like Wireshark, for example, he can see the password 123456. He can see it. Again, not everybody knows how to capture traffic, okay, but in case you have someone who's trying to make an attack, I'm sure that he knows how to do it. For this reason, you can use this simple if you don't want or you think that no one will be attacking your network, which is better than using none, okay, because you are just putting a password. But I would really recommend that you go to MD5. MD5 is like simple, so you put the password of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but the difference that this password is not sent as a clear text, it is encrypted. That means that each router will do some type of hashing and he will send it to the other router in a different format. For example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 could be like XY 1, 1, 5, 6, 7, DF10X, okay? So it's type of hashing. MD5 is a hashing algorithm. We don't need to know how MD5 works because that's MikroTik router by itself has the MD5 on the OSPF process enabled. So he knows the algorithm about, but you only need to select it. You just need to say, well, I want to select it. MD5 authentication, and you put the password. You have to do it on both routers. And in this case, they can recognize themselves if this password is the same on both sides. So this is really what I wanted to show you in this lecture. We've seen the type of authentications on OSPF for MikroTik routers, non-simple and MD5, and we talked about the difference between them. So now let's go directly and do the lab and see how we can enable OSPF authentication on MikroTik routers.